And the reason being is because as you kind of advance through, they're hoping that your critical skills are also advancing at that time. The third is smaller classes with much student interaction. So a lot of times in undergraduate programs, what you see often is it's very lecture-based. Is that most of your all's experience lecture-based with the faculty member talking the primary amount of time during the session? That's often what occurs. And the graduate programs, it's a little bit different. There's going to be a lot more discussion occurring, a lot more interaction with your peers, and the faculty member becomes the person who's facilitating that conversation. So it's not lectured, it's more facilitated discussion amongst you and your peers. And then the last is work experience via internships, teaching assistants, assistantships, and so forth. So all of those become options as you move into graduate level programs. And so that's just kind of a brief overview. The next thing I wanted to do was provide some tips for exploring programs. And so hopefully these tips are things that maybe you're already doing. How many of you are in your last year? So you'll be graduating hopefully in May-ish, maybe even next December. And so hopefully these will be tips that you could start now. And if you're in your junior year, you could still start now, right? And so before I kind of get into those tips, I will say that most of the things we'll be discussing in terms of the tips I provide for exploring programs, interviews, like informational interviews, these are all things that I also did. And I wish I probably had someone like a conference like this where they could have coached me on that, because I had to do this all on my own, figure it out on my own, and I made a lot of missteps. And that was when I was working on my master's. I'm also a PhD student right now. Thankfully, I didn't run into as many errors along the way as I was exploring programs, because it only takes that one moment, right, to live and learn. And that was it. And so hopefully these tips will help you avoid some of those pitfalls that you may or may not experience along the way. And so the first one is exploring your goals. Sounds pretty basic, right? That's what I thought. And then what I quickly learned is that graduate programs, some programs are very specific towards what you're wanting to pursue. When I first started school or my graduate program, I thought I wanted to be a counselor, and that lasted for one semester. And I was like, okay, I'm done. And unfortunately, the school did not refund me because I needed to figure that out. I just lost out, right? And probably still paying on that school right now. And so that exploring your career goals becomes so important, because in my undergrad major, it was pretty general. It was psychology. That was something that I studied. And I figured I only had one route, and that route was to go into counseling. It's untrue. There are so many different options. And with undergraduate degrees, that's what happens, is they're very general, the degrees. When you start going into grad programs, they become so much more specific, which is why it's so important to explore what your goals are and try to be really specific about those goals. So some of the questions I started to ask myself, and that I would encourage you to ask yourself, is what do you want from a graduate program? What is it that you're needing? What kind of experience do you want from that particular degree? Why do you want to attend grad school? And that why needs to go beyond, I want a better salary, or I want this title in this company, and so I'm going through graduate school. So you need to dig a little bit deeper into that why.
Can I say something about that as well?
Uh-huh.
I think, oh, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I think Marianne poses a really great question with this. There is a handout in your folder that says applying for graduate school, and there's a section in there saying know your goals, and it states my career goals are. And then the next piece is graduate school will help because, and it's prompting you to talk and think a little bit about that and write that out. Because if that feels unclear, it's a really big financial commitment to go into something that you're not sure about, especially if you're not sure what you're looking for in a graduate program. So I think Marianne's talking about so many like really critical pieces that this form is like really making you think about. So I would say really like write that out for yourself and write it down somewhere so that when you are looking at graduate schools, you're making sure that that's at the forefront of like what you're looking for.
I would, thank you, Jana. I love that there's a handout to kind of help you map out what that looks like for you. The second reason why I would say it's so important is because oftentimes when you're applying to graduate schools, they ask for a statement of purpose. Because most graduate programs are inviting 15 students, and you still have a ton of students who are applying. So they're getting like hundreds of applications for 15 slots. And so what happens is you have to write out your purpose, your statement of purpose. That is answering those questions. Why graduate school? What do you want to get out of it? Why is it important? Because this is how they're looking at your application. They want to see, does this person's goals align with our program outcomes? And if they don't, you may not be moving forward. And so that is something that I encourage you to do. I would also say that that purpose statement that I just suggested is not a generic statement for every program you apply to. These are going to be very specific to the schools that you're applying to. And the reason why is because you want to align your goals with the program outcomes to show this is why this program is important to me. This is why I'm applying to your program and not to the one down the street. Y'all have any questions in regards to that first point? Yes.
I've been recommending that students go on the websites for certain programs, find the faculty, find their publication. And usually the websites will have something about their outcome, as you mentioned, or their focus or emphasis. Is there anything else they can be doing? Can they, like she said in the other session, they could email some people at that program directly?
Yes, so the question was, is there other things that a student could be doing to kind of understand the specifics in regards to different graduate programs? Did I capture that? Okay.
Yeah.
There is, and give me 2 more slides and we're going to actually get there.
Okay, thanks.
One of those things that I always suggest for students to do are informational interviews. And those interviews are not just with faculty members, but they're also with numerous other people that you could be contacting. And I'll just be sharing some different methods that you could do to gather more insight and information on different programs. That was a great question. The second one is identify programs that fit your lifestyle. And what I mean by that is there are different programs available out there. There's programs that are completely online. There are some that are in person. You have to determine what's important for you. There are some programs that are specific, like hybrid type functions, kind of have virtual, kind of in person. So it's a mixture out there. So it's up to you to determine what it is that you want. Because if you're not a person who engages well online, or maybe just does not enjoy it, and you probably learned this last year when most things were online, an online program may not be your jam, and that's okay. But it's important to kind of know those pieces because of the investment that you're making at this point. I would also say geography is super important. And those are things you have to determine. Is the school in an urban area? Is it more like suburban? Where is the location? So those are things you also want to look at because you're going to invest a lot of time. If you're moving across the country, you want to make sure that school is in a location that you can adapt to for the past like 2 or for the next 2 or 3 years. The next is considering the cost and funding. This is super important because graduate programs, as we know, are already more expensive than undergrad programs. And oftentimes you are not awarded grants like the Pell Grant. I was on Pell Grant my entire undergraduate program. And when I went to graduate school, that Pell Grant was no longer there. And so I was strictly relying on scholarships and I was relying on loans. And so it's so important at this point to also research what kind of financial options are there. So we know that for financial options, there are loans. Some schools offer assistantships, which is basically students are paid a stipend or tuition fees, matriculation fees are paid for students to work in certain programs or offices on campus. Oftentimes those offices are very, you want to choose wisely because it may give you that experience or after graduation. Deanna, did you have a assistantship or?
Yeah, so some of the things that you'll hear, oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Some of the things that you'll hear in like some of the sessions later today is like, what are some things that you need to be keeping in mind? And you heard a little bit about it in Colleen's presentation in regards to a timeline. Part of the application process is also looking at funding options like assistantships, like fellowships. Sometimes that's like an additional part of the application process. Sometimes you have to set up a whole different like account with the school to be able to apply for the assistantships that they're offering, right? And that's a big part of sometimes people making that decision. Sometimes the professor that would have offered them a research opportunity that would have covered their funding maybe isn't taking students on until the next year because of that cycle of students graduating. Then that student might accept, but wait for the next year, which is like the deferring a year. So there have been, I know folks who have done that because they're waiting for that professor to be able to take them on so that they have funding. So those pieces are a big part of people's decision to attend one year versus another. I did apply for an assistantship when I was in graduate school, and that was a big part of like my decision because I went to San Francisco where housing was really hard to pay for, and they provided me housing because of that assistantship, or else I wouldn't have gone. If I would have not gotten that assistantship, I probably wouldn't have gone there. So those are big things to consider with funding, and that's a big part that you want to make sure that you're keeping track of in your application process is the funding and what they're offering you in assistantships and what does that mean.
Thank you. So as Deanna mentioned, there will be a session, I believe is at the 2 o'clock session where we will have someone from financial
Oh. 1 o'clock, sorry.
1 o'clock session, kind of speaking to the financial aid part of graduate school. Let's see. The next one is consider program resources and facilities. I think this one becomes so critical for a STEM student, particularly if you will be working in a lab. Because those facilities at this point in your studies becomes critical for you, because what your hope is to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, the facilities that are available, the research opportunities that are available. And a lot of that starts to depend on the type of facilities that that particular program has, what they have access to. Are they connected to like a hospital, like a system hospital, if you're wanting to go into the medical field? So all of those pieces become important. Where you learn about that is through informational interviews. This is connecting with faculty members, connecting with that institution that you're interested in. And so that kind of leads me to my next point of connecting with people. This becomes hard. I know for myself, as an introvert, like connecting with strangers is like, oh my gosh, doing cold calling, not good for me. And so what I thought I'd do was kind of give you some tips to kind of help alleviate perhaps some of that stress that some of y'all may feel. Or some of you may be like, this is my jam. I don't want to explore all these other pieces. I just want to connect with people. And so hopefully this will help anyone. And so informational interviews, as I mentioned, are not just with faculty members. Faculty members are important, current faculty members in the specific program you're wanting to apply to. The second one are current students. This piece, you may know students in that program, and if you do, that's fantastic. If you don't, there are still ways to connect with current students. And honestly, that's where you get most of the great information, because they're going to tell you the honest truth. They have no investment other than taking classes. So they will tell you the good, they'll tell you the bad, they'll tell you all the things. And ways to connect with students, you can, sometimes they offer orientation sessions for programs. You could attend those, and then you can ask to connect with a student afterwards. One of the great ways is to connect with their graduate assistant in that program. Oftentimes these graduate programs have grad assistants. They're a great person to connect with.
Yeah.
Deanna, do you know other places that you would go to?
Yeah, a really a pro tip that I think is super underrated is like LinkedIn. It's kind of like a professional, like appropriate way to look up people and ask them about like their experiences in that. So a good way to do that is looking up the university on LinkedIn. And then within that university, you can typically find a LinkedIn account for that specific program. When you go to that program, you'll typically see people connected to that program, and it'll say like, these are alumni, these are current students. Then you can like really see like, oh my God, all these people on LinkedIn are connected to this program because I found the program on LinkedIn. I'm gonna message them. I've gotten messages about my graduate program. It's been a super authentic conversation. I've reached out to people on LinkedIn about programs when I was looking, and it's such a good platform to use when you can't make it to an open house, when you can't go visit the school, right? I would say really take advantage of that, and they want to tell you like their experience. They want to help you out as well. So LinkedIn is a little underrated, so you got to try it out.
Thank you. That's a great recommendation. And it kind of gets to that last point that I made, is you want to also reach out to alumni, because again, they will tell you their experiences, the opportunities they had. But what they will also tell you is the kind of career opportunities that they were able to take advantage of after graduating from that particular program. And so that becomes a great method of connecting to understand a program and where all of that investment will lead to. And LinkedIn, I would probably say, is one of the great places to go to connect with alumni.
So update your LinkedIn is the moral of the story as well.
Deanna just said, update your LinkedIn. That is the moral of the story. So I would agree. So preparing for an informational interview, research the university and the program you're interested in. And Colleen had some really great points earlier where she said some programs may have a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. If that's important to you, that's great. Some programs may be focused on pediatric care. That is great too. So you want to identify what your interest is, and then you want to research those programs to make sure that the faculty within that program are have that research experience. Because if the faculty members have the research experience that you're interested in, the likelihood of you being able to take advantage of those experiences through your own research is probably pretty high. And so that's one of the functions that I would say is critical. The second is prepare and prioritize a list of open-ended questions. One of the things that I would add here is this is why it becomes so important to research the program online, and it's because your open-ended questions that you should ask are questions that you cannot find the answer on their website. Because if you go in with questions that could be answered if you visited their website, that faculty member or anyone you're connecting with will probably say, go to our website. And then all you may have demonstrated is that you haven't put in the time to research that program. And so what are some open-ended questions that you could ask? I think one of the questions I remember asking when I was applying to different doctoral programs was how do faculty members embed diversity, equity, and social justice within their curriculum? Because on their website, they said this was a focus, which I was very happy about because that's what I was looking for. And so I wanted to ask the faculty, well, how do you do this? If it's important to this program, how do you include it in your curriculum? And that was something I couldn't get just by looking at their website. And it also puts the faculty member on the spot too, which is sometimes really good. Yes.
I have a potential open-ended question that I encourage some students to ask of the program.
So Mike?
I encourage students to ask the program if they could put them in touch with former graduate students to tell their experience.
That's a good one.
I love that idea. Because hopefully they're still connected with students as they should be. And if they're unwilling to share a list of contacts for you, you might want to question that. Other open-ended questions. I think one question that I like to ask as well is, in what ways do students engage in research experiences through the program? Do they work with students through research? And a lot of times, again, it becomes hard to identify if those opportunities exist on their websites. And so I think it's a great question to see, to check into. The next one is practicing mock interviews. Really, this is just to ensure that you are ready to engage. How many of you have done like mock interviews for jobs? You could do these through career services. They're intense. I remember an experience I had, they recorded the mock interview and made me watch it.
With them?
Yes,
With
because they
purpose.
were critiquing me. They would pause it and then they'd be like, okay, this is what you need to do. It is great and it is hard at the same time. But I think when we're able to see ourselves and how we're engaging, we start to see those mannerisms that we picked up along the way that could really impact us in an interview process. And so oftentimes, because you're all students here, career centers on the campus that you're attending, they offer these opportunities of doing mock interviews. And I think it's a great way not only to prepare for an informational interview for a graduate program, but also if you're wanting to go straight into the workforce, it's a great way to practice those interview skills. The next thing I would add is update your portfolio. Oh, we have a question.
Sorry. So I have actually, well, I personally have a mock interview in a few weeks, like 2 weeks. So how is that like laid out from your experience? Like what has like happened in your interview?
I think from what I could recall from my mock interview, and granted, this was maybe a decade ago. They were general questions that they would ask me. Tell me about yourself. They would ask me, you know, the strengths and weaknesses, like questions. Why do you want this job? Because you should, or one question of why do you want to attend this program? So that's how we did it. They were more general questions that I needed to be able to articulate my why. They weren't just like closed-ended questions. They were questions that forced me to really think about my own purpose, my own goals, which is why it becomes so important to take a look at the handout that's in your folder, because informational interviews, that faculty member may ask you, why are you considering this program? And you should be prepared to answer that question, because as you're interviewing them for more information, they're also interviewing you. And if that impression you make is like you did your homework, you did really well, they will look for your name to see if you applied. And so that's why this mock interview is so important, because it's going to force you to think about your purpose, your goals, and your why, and to understand like your own goals. So that's, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can add something. I think a good thing to do is like, yes, interviewing with a stranger, like can be tough. And I think it's also good to interview with like people who you feel comfortable with, like mentors or professors, because as you're talking about graduate programs that you're interested in or your goals, if it's someone who has like no clue about the program, are they able to like see those pieces about your responses? If they're helping you, are they getting a sense of like, wow, like you really showed me like how passionate you are about this program and how it really aligns with your career goals and what you're hoping to bring to the program and hoping to get out. So I think it can be intimidating to do mock interviews with strangers. So also encourage you to do those with people that you feel comfortable with and really get that authentic like feedback. But the hope is that folks who are helping you interview can get a sense really of all that information, can really understand the program without even knowing about that program. So really do your research on like, why are you choosing this specific program and why are you hoping to attend graduate school as a whole?
I think that's a great point, especially, I know for some of you, because I recognize your faces and who you came with, are in a trio program, whether that be the AAC here at CSU, or is it Che at UNC? There's multiple, if you're involved in any type of support program within TRIO, or you just have those people around you, ask your advisor, your retention specialist. That's what they're there for. Or ask your supervisor if you're working at the TRIO program. I know you are.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Then you could connect with your supervisor. Because they could also kind of help support you in that way. And the last one is kind of just brushing up on the professional etiquette. And I have a lot of issues with the idea of like professionalism, but I won't get into that here. But it's all, you have to kind of brush up on those. You want to make sure that you are respectful of their time. So if you requested 30 minutes, you don't want to go past 30 minutes because you want to show that you can, you know, keep track of time and that you're respectful of their time that they're already providing. You want to send a thank you email for the time that they took out of their day to connect with you about their program. And so those small touches of just like business etiquette are incredibly important at this time. Because it's an informational interview, I think it's easy to become lax in that type of situation, but it's still an interview, regardless if it's an informational interview, a job interview, or whatnot. You're still having to put your best foot forward in that moment because you want them to remember you. No, that's okay. Never apologize for a question.
So my interview is actually with Anschutz, and I was wondering like how early is too early? Are they gonna be like, what the heck, you're only a junior? Why are you doing this?
No, it's actually, you should be doing that during your junior year. And I'll show a timeline at the end of this slide, but typically, if you're wanting a fall admission start, then you should be doing informational interviews by no later than the spring before. And so what I was telling the student just last week, as we were talking about his own timeline, he's wanting to apply to graduate programs fall of 22. That would be his admission date, is fall of 22. And so our timeline at this point is this past summer, he spent his time researching different programs. He spent time connecting with people, knowing that he would be applying to these programs in December. Because in undergrad, some schools you could apply like 2 weeks before classes start and they will look at your application. Graduate programs, you're usually applying like 6 months out. And so you should be doing your research, connecting with people well before then. And like I said, I kind of have like a timeline that I put together that I'll share with you.
And I want to say also that like for folks who are taking time off after undergrad, right? Like I think you can create your own timeline on what that looks like even after. I think a lot of folks feel nervous to take time off if they're thinking about graduate school because they're thinking that there might be like a big gap of like not getting support. What is that 1 year or 2 years experience going to look like? It is a lot of time and commitment to apply for a program. It's like a second job, really. So really being mindful if your timeline, when Marianne talks about it, that's really heavy, like just readjusting that to what works for you. If you're not in school anymore, that's okay. You can still just have your own timeline as long as you continue to connect with support with your advisors, retention specialists, even after you graduate, faculty, all the support.
Thank you so much. I think what you said, Deanna, is so important because you want to make sure that you're ready for the time investment, the financial investment, and understanding your goals and your why. And if you don't know those goals and your why you're attending graduate school right after graduating with your bachelor's, then it's okay to take a year off to figure that piece out. And so you have to go when it's right for you, not when it's right for everyone else. So the last thing, not the last thing I'll go into, how much more time do I have?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay. The last thing I would say about informational interviews is selecting the perfect questions is important. And so it's hard to do that because those questions are going to be dependent on the program you're wanting to apply to. But I do have 3 recommendations for questions you shouldn't be asking. The first one is do not ask overly detailed questions that could be answered by another office. So if you're asking about what loan options there are for graduate school, that faculty member or student you're connecting with will probably say you should connect with the financial aid office. And so those detailed questions should be saved for that particular office that can really share the details of those. The second is do not ask pessimistic questions. You want to go in confidently. And what I mean by that second point is I'll share a personal example of mine. Remember when I said I had to go through the hardship of learning all this on my own? This is one of these learning experiences. When I graduated with my undergrad, I graduated with a 2.87 GPA. And I'm not going to share how I got that GPA, but I will say I learned a lot of life lessons along the way. A lot of the graduate programs I was applying to required a 3.0 or higher. And so one of my first informational interviews that I did, I went in there and I was like, I have a 2.875 GPA. I know it's not good. I'm really nervous about taking the GRE and not great, not great. And so what I had to learn was how to reframe that. And so what I did was I started to think about, okay, what are these life lessons that you learned along the way, Marianne? How can you explain why you have such a low GPA for graduate school, but that you still have what it takes to graduate from graduate school? So I had to learn how to reframe some of those pieces. I learned not to discount my own testing abilities that I had to take because I had to take the GRE, which is just an entrance exam for graduate school. So that's what I mean by do not ask pessimistic questions or have that pessimistic entrance into that interview. The last one is do not ask questions that could be answered by researching their website. If you need clarity, it's okay to ask for clarity, but you need to demonstrate that you researched their program at the same time. So, evaluating programs, compiling information. One of the things I did was, it's like, what do I do with all this information? I did my informational interviews, I researched the website, I talked to their financial aid to see what types of financial opportunities there are. Now it's time to compile all the information that you took in to make your decision on where you're applying to. And so I listed 3 things that you could use to evaluate the programs that you're interested in. The first one is reputation of the faculty and program. Does that program offer you the pieces that are essential to what your goals are? So for me, it was, did the program come from a critical place with diversity, equity, and social justice? If it didn't, I didn't apply. If they couldn't tell me how they included it in their curriculum, I didn't apply. And so that's the point too. All of those informational interviews that you did, this is how you're able to respond to that question, the reputation of faculty and program. The second, it kind of goes along with that first one, the quality of the program. And then the last one is affordability and additional financial opportunities. And so that one is hard because the program you really want to go to may not be financially accessible. And that is, it's a tough one. I applied to 4 doctoral programs. The doctoral program I'm attending is here at CSU. The one I wanted to attend was University of Southern California. It had the faculty doing the research that I was interested in and am still interested in. They were including DEI SJ into their curriculum in very beautiful ways and doing research outside of, their departments. And that school would cost me $95,000 a year. I was like, no. I still want to go to that school. And I'm still trying to just connect with their faculty because they're really doing the work that I appreciate, but I simply could not afford it. And not to say CSU isn't great, because I really enjoyed my experience here and the opportunities, but that it becomes really important, that financial piece. And so you don't want to underestimate that. So what I have here is a sample planning guide. You can ask Deanna, I'm a very structured person in how I look at things, which is why I have a Excel sheet. But it becomes, if you're looking at well, look at that, your
There's also-
folder.
There's also like an example. There's an example of one of what Marianne is providing here, and we'll also talk about it in our 2 o'clock session, or more detailed.
Yeah, so you want to figure out a way to track all that information, because if you are looking at 10 different programs and you only want to apply to 5, it becomes essential that you're able to just organize it in some way. It could be an Excel sheet, it could be what they're sharing in the folder. It could be how your best friend is organizing it, but in some way it becomes important to make sure that you're organized in kind of the different programs that you're wanting to pursue. The next slide is the timeline that I shared. And so this is just an example timeline. This is a timeline, I should say, for fall admissions. And so what I usually suggest to students, if you're wanting to apply for admission for fall of 2023, then I would probably start suggesting to students, you should start exploring different graduate programs. Start understanding your reason for graduate school. What are your goals? What are you wanting to study specifically? By February or May of 2002. So that's more than a year out.
2002?
2000.
22.
2001.
You said 2002?
Yes.
22?
We're 20 years behind.
Oh my gosh,
Sorry, I was like, hold on.
thank you. 2022.
Two. Sorry, and also I have like a Zoom and
Okay.
it also like captions this whole conversation about the year for our folks via Zoom, which is really
Oh,
funny.
goodness. Um, What you want to do for that following June is sign up for test prep. You want to understand what test are you having to take for the program that you're interested in. Is it the graduate records examination? That's the GRE, probably the most standard one out there. Is it the graduate management assessment? I think that's what it's called, the GMAT.
Mhm.
Is it the dental admissions test, which is for students who are wanting to pursue their doctorate in dentistry? And so you want to find out which exam is the program of study you're wanting to pursue requiring for some programs. Not all graduate programs require any type of exam, but I would say that test prep courses are great. Or if you just want to check out a book, buy the book, whatever it is, and study yourself for the exam, you could do that as well.
Ask your friends and offices that you're working with also if they have anything in-house, because they can.
Yes. The next thing, the following June, July, is begin to visit programs, conduct the informational interviews that I had talked about, and prepare for your test. So you asked, is it too early to do this? I'm a junior. You're right on schedule, actually. The next thing is October, request official transcripts and start to draft your personal statement that most programs are going to require for you to complete. If it's not a statement of purpose, you want to look at the website of that program to determine what are they wanting you to address in their application. So at this point, you should be preparing the application. And then most deadlines, depending on when it is, if you're looking at a fall start, a lot of those deadlines, priority deadlines, are probably December, sometimes even February. So you want to determine when those deadlines are. And that kind of goes back into my example of the spreadsheet. Is I included on there, what is the application deadline? Because those application deadlines are different for every single program that you're going to be applying to. And so with that said, does anyone have one question? Because we are over time. If you want, you could contact me directly. I listed my email address up there. It's basically my first name dot last name. I welcome you to reach out with any questions you might have. I will be around here through lunch as well. So you could ask me in person if you want.
Yeah, and Marianne, I might be available at 3:00 during the working
Yeah.
hour, which is when we're giving students opportunity to work on things that we've talked about and have staff to support folks. So she might be available. So if you see Marianne around, feel free to connect with her as well.
Or Deanna.
Yes, I'll be here as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming. And best of luck to you when you do apply to graduate school or start to consider what those goals are in your reason.
So we're gonna now have lunch over in the long speak room. We have spoons. If folks are heading out for the day, folks via Zoom, please remember to do the evaluation form. There's a QR code on the tables on the registration on your way out. Please do that. If you're hanging out for the day, you don't have to do that yet. Thank you all. Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you.